What's up, future shredlords? Welcome back. Death of the Fingers. Kind of got a question about how to make the connection between triads and arpeggios. Like how to make the jump between, okay, I'm working on these inversions, but kind of boring. So I need something to spice it up. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, you got to go instantly to the arpeggio stuff. But of course, that requires you sort of like getting a refresher and a primer here on the cage system and how this inversion nonsense works and all the rest of that stuff. So we're going to go over that today. We're going to talk about some of the basic information, then how to what I call upscale that information with respect to, you know, music theory. So you can convert it from just some sort of simple truths, if you will, like 1 + 1 = 2 in the music world, to something a lot more powerful when you're using it in improvisation, because now all of a sudden you have this new tool to play with and you're like, okay, that really helps. If you're always playing stuff as scales, your playing gets boring. If you're always sweeping, it's boring. If you're always doing hammer-ons and pull-offs or tapping or something, anything that's too much of anything, like in excess where there's no change, it gets boring. So obviously, you know, adding these little tools, how to use the inversions of a major and a minor and a diminished triad kind of situation to create arpeggio runs all over the fretboard. Well, obviously, that's something that you can work on over the next 10 or 15 or 20 or your entire life, whatever it is, and have as like a real serious weapon in the improvisation game, like very serious. So that's the whole point. And on top of that, you can get into tangential ideas like triad pairs, which are equally important, insanely powerful. So there's a whole new universe that opens up. It starts off, as I've said many times, with just the basics. You're like, okay, don't hit me with the truth all at once there, big guy. You take every other note of a major scale and you make a triad. Done. Okay, that seems pretty straightforward. But when you start to think about the far-reaching implications and how it can apply in terms of theory, and it's not exactly like you're doing calculus here, essentially, in the music world, you get some absolutely devastating effects. And it can really help diversify your playing. So, I'm done talking. Let's get into this lesson. All right, future shredlords, let's get into this. Essentially, level 1 here is just understanding the major scale and how to make triads. And the colors they yield, the sounds, major, minor, diminished, they yield when you basically string them together in a diatonic sense, meaning each step of a major scale. Right? So what does all that mean? Essentially, we need to choose a sonic range, and I'm like, I want to use this open D major chord here, right, to be like the basis of all this arpeggio and triad stuff. So that must mean that this is the 1 chord of the key of D. So I'm like, I could move up here to the 10th fret. I could do a major scale this way, right? But this 10th fret, that's pretty far away from this open position, so I could just move here to the 5th fret and just do the same thing, right? Now that was me basically ascending using the Lydian mode. That's also Mixolydian there to descend, right? So you could be like, oh look, Mixolydian has also got a major scale. Yeah, if you start on the note D in this case, or the 4th degree, 1, 2, 3, 4. The 4th degree of a major scale, obviously, or of the Lydian mode is the major scale, but that's getting into the weeds a little bit, right? But I'll leave it up to you to figure that out. You should just be able to hear the scale. You're like, okay, there's this one. I can use the classical method and just keep going. And then descend using 3 notes per string too. Right, so on and so forth. But you'll have to go at your own pace. Once I get that far, obviously what I want to do now is start exploding out this compact scale just onto 1 string, so I can now see each position as I move up to do the diatonic, harmonization of the scale, so I can see each position based on the steps of a major scale, right? So I've got this sort of whole step configuration, half, whole, half, right? And that basically takes this scale and converts it into, right? So now I know each position here, so to speak, on the A string where I'm going to be playing all of these triads. Next thing I need to do is choose every other note of the scale. That's the harmonization process, where I start on a note, in this case, D, and I go to the third note, 1, 2, 3, and then I go to the fifth note. So I got 1, 3, 5, major, right? Then I'm going to move to 2 here, 2, 4, and 6, right? Then move up again. That's 3, 5, 7. I'm going to keep doing that all the way up the fretboard, obviously, and I'm going to get that sound. But what I really want to do now is take this sort of 2-string configuration, move this note here to the next string so I can play the actual triads, right? There's my major. Now here's my minor. Minor, major. Ooh, gotta use your third there, that high up. Man, let me tell you, that didn't feel good. But there it is, right? So that's the next one. After I explode out the notes individually, now I want to build the triads off each one. So when I move to the first one, it'll be major. When I move to the second, minor. And just keep following that pattern. Major, minor, minor, major. Major, minor, diminished, major. First degree is major, second degree is minor, third degree is minor, fourth degree is major, fifth degree is major, sixth degree is minor, seventh degree is diminished, and then you're back to the start again with the first degree, or sometimes people call it 8. That usually only happens when you're talking about extending the chord beyond 3 or 4 notes. That's another video, but you get the idea there, okay? So now I can take that and I can apply it just on this string, right? If I have this major triad, I could take this third and lower it down a half step to get minor and get diminished. Now I have all 3 versions of that, so I can now do the exact same thing I just did starting on the A string, but now starting on this configuration. There's 3 notes in this chord. There must be 3 corresponding chords that use the note D, right? There's the note D in the first one. When I move to the next D, it's right there. That's going to give me this one. There's the next version of the D. There's one D, one inversion. Here's the next inversion of it. Here's the next one up here at the E. When the D's on this one here, and I could keep going to this one here, obviously, which is going to give me this root one. Right? The same as this one. But I can also climb up diatonically. Major, moving up to the minor, minor, major again, major, minor for the 6th degree, diminished for 7, and back to the root. Or I can just go as straight up inversions. D major, D major, D major, and D major. And the importance of that is I can now go from this D major here to the D minor, to the D minor, to the D minor, and finally to the D minor. That's tricky, that one. I think I'll do it like that. Oh, I can't even see. Man, that's tricky with the mic in my face. Next one obviously is diminished, but you're like, okay, diminish. That's got to climb up in minor thirds. So I'm going to move up the minor third here, right? And then jump up another minor third, and then jump up another minor third, and then jump up another minor third. Right? So that's the nature of that one. You could do augmented, you could do dominant 7. I'll leave those ones open for you to figure out on your own. That way you have some homework action going on. But you're starting to see the idea here. There's a whole bunch of things you can do with these triads, right? So I've got this diminished here, right? Starting way up here, right? When I'm doing just a diatonic one. So if that's true, that must means I can move down here and move down again and move down again. Right, so now you got this one. You've got the D minor here. You're starting to appreciate what's going on there. Moving up here again. I got another D major. And so on and so forth, right? So you can start getting ridiculous with substituting them and creating sequences and all the rest of that stuff. But the most important information, choosing the sonic range, in this case, D major. Recognizing where you are with respect to the 3 notes per string system or the classical system, or however you want to do that, cage system, right? And then, of course, exploding it out onto one string building the triads, first starting as a 2-string option, right? So you can just get the sound, and you can be like, this note's got to be moved over here. Moving up to the next one. Same one. You're like, there's minor, same shape, there's major, so on and so forth. And if I want to diminish, let's see, 2 minor thirds stacked on top of each other, right? For the 7th degree there, me moving down a half step now. So see what I mean? That bass information is absolutely crucial. And if you don't get it, you're in serious trouble. And the last level is caged. You're like, there's the D-type chord. There's the A-type chord. There is the E-type chord. And there is the D-type chord again. Or the C-type if you want to. Here again, C-type, A-type, E-type. And then back up here to the C-type. And then moving down, that's the... Which one's this? That's the G-type. Okay, because that's what this one looks like right here, right? So that's how I just lump them together whenever I do this configuration. I always think of it as the G-type because it's always right there, right? So I don't try to make things overly complicated and be like, oh no, it's this one here, it's the C-type or whatever. They're all G's. G and C share the same, but in this case, I see this as a C1. But in this case, I see it as a D. I'll leave it up to you to come up with your own crazy system. But that's the first step, obviously, is just mastering the major scale, figuring out the triads themselves, understanding that you can either move up diatonically, meaning major, minor, minor, major, and so on and so forth, or you can move up using inversions. There's a first major inversion, there's another one, and there's the first one I started with, and I could do the same thing with minor, of course. And we already talked about diminished and augmented to a certain degree. So there it is. Now let's get into how I can stack these vertically on top of each other and then move into creating the arpeggio sequences. All right, Shred Sexies, with part 2 here, essentially all we're doing is now taking these triad ideas and now starting to create big, long, sort of monster-sized arpeggio sequence based on the inversions that are now being sort of explored all over the fretboard. So of course, step 1, of course, in this case is, get these inversions down kind of deal. You're like, okay, there's my E type moving down A, there's my C type kind of thing. There's a G there. There's a, that's another G type from there. Okay. How you do that and remember them all and stuff is up to you kind of deal. But obviously that's got to be step 1. Afterwards, then you can start to be like, we're going to start to attack this one. And then you're going to be like, okay, I can jump down to this one here, right? And then there's another one. If I keep going. Okay, those are me moving through each one of those inversions. There's the arpeggio, 1, 3, 5, just on 2 strings. And there's, again, more of the arpeggio on 2 strings. And then there's the arpeggio on 3 strings. And if I kept going up, there's another 3 strings, and then going up again, 3 strings, going up again, 3 strings, 3 strings, right? So I'm going to start to do that. I might start here at the highest one and be like, and then jump down, and then jump down. Okay, so putting them all together in the order, one after another, cycling through them, starting in the lower ranges kind of situation. If I'm here down in this F sharp here, right? From here, where do I want to go? That's 7, right? Because there's 1, right? So I can jump up here. Now, where do I want to go? Jump again? You see what I mean? I moved up here. That's the G type. Moved up again into the E type. Then I would have moved back down, maybe using the A type here, and then maybe move back up to the E type, so on and so forth. And that's really what you're trying to practice, because it will break down this fretboard and this knowledge for you massively. And then you can organize it, and then you'll already recognize it. You'll be like, there's the first inversion major, right? Which puts this at the second version major, which gives me the root. major triad as an inversion, right? Obviously based off 6 strings. So that now tells me that this is the Phrygian mode. When I move up here to the next one, obviously that's giving me, yeah, you guessed it, Mixolydian. And then the last one's giving me the major scale. Okay, so that's how it works. Is you start to be like, okay, I've got these individuals. There's a second inversion. Then I've got this one. That's a root inversion. That's a first inversion. That's one level of awareness and consciousness with respect to the chords. And you're like, okay, now they stack together kind of situation. I'm like, there's 1, 3, 5. That's a root inversion just played on 2 strings. Then I'm, oh yeah, there's my second inversion, right? Which one is this? What note is that? And that's when you're like, that's the F sharp there, essentially. Where is that? The F sharp in relation to D major, you know what I mean? It's the third. So it makes it a first inversion. So you're like, okay, that's a first inversion. And that's a second inversion. And that's a root inversion. And that's a first inversion there. Okay, and so on and so forth. There's a root inversion because the D's on the bottom. If I move to this one, it's a second inversion. If I move to this one, it's a first inversion kind of thing. And then you're like, oh look, there's a first inversion. That's what that looks like. 1, and then barred. The second inversion is... Now, I use individuals there. I don't like to bar when it's really close like that, of course. And then again... And then again, right, and so on and so forth until you get them all down. And then, of course, after you sort of get good at that, just moving through them like that and sort of picking off each shape and knowing what the inversion is and whatnot, then it's time to start to organize them into like sequences, bigger ones where you use 3 notes per string system or the classical method or the pentatonics or all the blues notes and everything else. Any note sequence you can actually imagine to start to obviously embellish it and recognize that there are certain arpeggio shapes that are overlapping, meaning they're the same. So you don't even need to waste time figuring it out. Like, for example, if I look at this first one here, it's the same as, well, am I going to do this crazy stretch like this and then into this bar and whatnot when I can just sort of do this very easy one? Does it make a lot of sense to sort of spend a huge amount of time? Should you know how to do it? Should you play it? Yeah. But the thing is you're like, this is very awkward, but and then of course you're just going to climb all the way down. And there's no juiciness or so sauciness there, right? And if you're like, okay, well, that is essentially Lydian. I have this extra note here, right? And this one. Now, that's way more interesting than... Again, me just borrowing a couple notes. Then I've also got... So on and so forth. Now, all of a sudden, I've created like an arpeggio sequence using the major or major 7 arpeggios or other variations of them too by just moving between the 2 positions but just alternating between these notes. So obviously you can see it went from this right to me adding in this note here. Again, from this sequence, right? That comes from Lydian, 3 notes per string, of course. And of course these other ones. See how that sounds a little bit nicer when I add that extra note? I could do it like that, of course, but it sounds a little bit more sort of refined and smoothed out when I add that extra note. And again, trial and error process, hearing it as best as you can. And you might sit there and develop that idea. You might be like, then down one more, again, repeating this section. See what I mean? So if you worked on that so you got it pretty fast, it would sound absolutely killer, right? But that's the idea there is I took that one tiny little sort of arpeggio fragment and turned it into something a lot more interesting. But I didn't, do a whole bunch of theory magic to it or anything else. I just looked at the basic stuff. Where does this fit in terms of 3 notes per string, or on the fretboard, what system does it fall under? And then try to choose the other notes, if you will, and see how that worked out. And then ultimately I was like, I have this idea where I'm like this. Right? So I've got that sort of sequence of 3 notes coming down there, and I can just use, again, this arpeggio sequence to really take it over the top. So it sounds great. And that's the whole idea, is you're like, okay, I've got this one here. And then I want to sort of jump up here to the next one on the A string. So in this case, I have the root of this triad based on the low E, right? And instead of moving to the next one in the sequence or whatever, I want to jump up to the next one here and have the root on the A. And then I want to do it again now, and I want to have it in the next one. Sorry, I'm choking to death here, right? And then maybe jump back over here to do the highest one kind of situation. Same one. And you don't want to go here because obviously that's too far. So you might go to this one first and then down to there again, right? So break it up. So then you'd be like, okay, it's this one, then it's this one, then it's this one, and then it's this one, and then maybe probably end here. And finished. And then turn it into an arpeggio sequence where you're like, okay, they've got this. What other notes do I have? Right, so you're going to jump into the next one here. Right, which is going to give me the now. See what I'm saying? Now all of a sudden I have something that I can work with rather than just canned licks. You can be like, I'm starting here with this one. What notes do I have available here? Well, we've already gone over this kind of situation when I'm here like this. We're in Lydian, right? So, of course, if I'm here, I've got either this one. That's a pretty cool one. Or I've got this one. So they're both pretty interesting. Or you can go up. Or you can do skipping over this one altogether, right? Then moving into the next position, moving into the next position. So each little step builds on itself. You're like, here's the note D, here's the triad, right? And then you're like, okay, now I want to connect it together with this triad. And so you're like, okay. And then last, you got to be like, okay, I need an interconnecting note here. So it goes from just being the 2 triads to 2 musical ideas using the triads. Again. Starts off slow, and of course you can then start filling in the blanks. Right, moving into the next one. Done. And in that case, I use this G type. Notice there. I use this one up here. So in that case, that's where my mind was when I was like, I want to go to this one. I'm basically with this backwards G type. So I have this configuration. So I base my little arpeggio idea and extra note based off this. Instead of this or this or this. In this case, I went with this. This 5th, which also happens here. Or sorry, here, right? And of course, in mine, I also have it down here at the 7th string. So you're starting to get the idea there that this is another element and aspect that you can now use. And so you're like, okay, I've got the triad, but I've also got this power chord that happens in 3 different spots. So maybe I should figure that out. And you're like, okay, I've got this one, which goes into the power chord. And then that one leads into this power chord, which leads into this triad. So all of a sudden, again, you've gone through this process of mapping out the fretboard. So you're like, this easily goes into this, or you could be like, this goes into this. And notice that sound, right? So there, I should have really played it here. So on and so forth. That was 5-1. My bad. Whatever. I can't help it. I just can't. So there it is. Right? So we'll leave it there for today. I think that's enough. I've beaten you down enough. I think. Yes, I'm pretty sure I have. Start with that. Build up your knowledge of the fretboard. Work on the triads first just by strumming them and getting it down. Understand the basic process of how to create triads. Start with a major scale in a compacted position. Explode it out onto one string. Then work through each step of that major scale using the harmonization process, every other note in the scale, right? So you're like 1, 3, 5, and then 2, 4, 6, and then 3, 5, 7, and so on and so forth. Then basically stack them on top of each other so you get the chords, and you get the chord tonalities basically per scale degree. And then at the end, you can then start using the inversions of these shapes of the triads themselves to now basically create much bigger ones. And then you can then work on the diatonic stuff way later. But get good at the inversions. I skipped over that part and it kind of hurt me. So don't make my mistakes. Instead, work on that first. And trust me, when you get to doing the diatonic stuff, you'll do it much better because you'll have a way better foundation. Do not skip over these inception stages because it'll hurt you later on. That's it for today. Thanks for hanging out. See you in the next one.